So we talked about how music is a journey, and just like any journey, when you go far away from home, you start at your home base, the C, but maybe you go to some chords that are a little bit farther away, have some tension in them, and you're coming back home. Just like that journey, when you pull into your driveway, the end of the journey, musically speaking, that's called a cadence. Cadence is just a word that means the end of the journey, the end of the progression, usually like the last two chords of the piece, or the last two chords of a phrase, or the last two chords of a particular section, like the verse or the chorus. Now, when we were talking a minute ago, we talked about how great is our God, and how you have, in the key of C, sing to me how great, this is the G chord, and how strong this pull is. Everybody knows what's coming. It's the one chord, the C, how great is our God. That cadence, those last two chords, the G pulling you to the C, pulling you home, that's called an authentic cadence. Now, these are just music theory names that, you're just as likely to hear a pop band, a rock band, call it a 5-1 cadence. But you should know the names. This is called an authentic cadence. This is the most common ending, the most common cadence, a 5-1 cadence. So in the key of C, that's the G chord pulling you to the C chord. Bazillion worship songs that use that progression. So that's the authentic cadence, 5-1. Now another one that you do hear a lot is the 4-1. How about the song Power of Your Love from Hillsongs? With the power of your love, it's a 4 chord going down to the 1 chord. If you think about it, another name for this is the Amen cadence, because it sounds like the end. If you were brought up in traditional church, it's the end of every hymn you ever heard your whole life, right? It's sometimes called the Amen cadence, but the real name, the music theory name, is plagal cadence. You can see it in the book, P-L-A-G-A-L, the plagal cadence. And lots of times you can put, you can fill it up. Like here's the 4 to the 1. You can, it's like in Let It Be, right? Bill Withers. You can even walk straight down from the 4. But any cadence, any ending that has that 4-1 thing is a plagal cadence, a 4-1 cadence. Now, those are the two that are sort of really bring you home. Now, there's a couple of relatives that are pretty interesting. A half cadence, like you would think, is a cadence that kind of brings you halfway home. It's not like pulling in the driveway and pulling in the garage necessarily. It's kind of pulling down your street, but then it's like, I think I'm going to go back and get a quart of milk because we've been on this long journey and there's nothing in the fridge, kind of thing. An example would be a lot of times half cadences show up halfway in a section. Like think about Shout to the Lord. You're in the chorus here. First half. So that didn't bring you home. It kind of brought you almost home, but it's sort of leaving you that halfway feeling. That's called a half cadence. Generally, a half cadence is a cadence that brings you to 5, brings you to the driveway. You're right on the brink of going home, and yet it stops there. So that's called a half cadence. And I say a lot of times that shows up halfway in a chorus, halfway in a verse. Another interesting one is called the deceptive cadence. And just like it sounds, it's a cadence that sets you up, totally feels like we're coming home. You're ready to pull in the garage, and yet the chord progression takes you someplace differently. It deceives you. Great example of that is, so Shout to the Lord. Lots of times you'll end with this last line of the chorus. You're set up to go to 1, but it goes here. Still haven't gotten to the 1 chord yet. These are deceptive cadences because they set you up for the 1, and then finally you get the authentic cadence, the 5 chord going to the 1. So basically what a deceptive cadence is, it's a cadence that sets you up to go to the 1 and then yanks you someplace else. Lots of times it'll yank you to the 6 chord like I did there. I was here on the 5, I was ready to go to 1, but I got 6 instead. I mean, you could go any place, but any place other than 1 where you expect. That's why it's deceptive, right? It fools you. Now there's a couple of other wild ones that I'll mention to you. These are interesting and great, and you do run into them occasionally. One interesting one is called the Picardy Third, which is just named after the town that made it popular. Basically what a Picardy Third does is, if you're in minor, for instance, let's take a minor song like Awesome God, for instance, you know, and you'd finish off, our God is an awesome God. You're going to minor, you're going to A minor. God is an awesome God. A Picardy Third, when you're expecting minor, it's going to turn that minor chord into major. So the final time, our God is an awesome God. So a Picardy Third takes the expected minor chord and turns it into major. It's an interesting one. Another cool one is, this is based on one of the modes that we're going to get to later. This is called a Phrygian cadence, spelled with a PH. Scope the workbook, it'll show it to you on the staff. A Phrygian cadence, let me just show you what it sounds like. If you think of the song Above All, you know, Above All by Paul Baloche and Lenny LeBlanc. Let's stay in the key of C. In the middle of the verse. That's a Phrygian cadence. And then you jump back to the 1 chord. So a Phrygian cadence definitely kind of takes you to a different direction. When we get into the modes, we're going to talk about the Phrygian mode. You can sort of hear how that has a little bit of the sound of Phrygian is sort of built around sort of what our ears associate with Spanish, Moorish. It's because of the notes that are in the Phrygian mode. That's where that Phrygian cadence comes from. More on that later. The last one I want to mention to you is this is usually just called a backdoor cadence. It's when you're up like a plagal cadence. You think we're here on 4 and we're going to go down to 1, but instead it goes from the 4 major to the 4 minor and then to the 1. It's called a backdoor cadence. Another place you hear this would be, you know, in the end of Layla. Backdoor cadence. A couple of other crazy ones. Now, it's worth mentioning here that cadences can be extended. So all these cadences we talked about are really 2 chords. It's the last 2 chords, the 5-1 or the 4-1. When you talk about extending a cadence, that means putting a chord before those 2. And oftentimes, if you think of that 5-1 cadence, you know, it's the most common cadence. If you put 2 in front of the 5, you're extending the cadence. So we're definitely going to explore extended cadences later in the book. But it's interesting how there's a phrase in jazz that says if you can 2-5-1, you can get anywhere in music. It's really kind of true, harmonically speaking, because you can use that 2-5-1 to set up just about any chord, and you can use it to go to any destination, not just the 1 chord. But more on that later.